Welcome to Mission Imperfect, the podcast about finding your own path, your own way, and embracing the imperfection of the journey.
We're your hosts, life coaches, former HR professionals, and mums, Kirsty and Kathryn.
We love to discuss the topics that come up time and time again for our coaching clients and which affect us all, from things like acceptance and boundaries to values and well-being and everything in between.
Each episode ends with a question for you and us to reflect on. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to grab a cuppa and a biscuit and join us in getting lost in finding ourselves.
Welcome back to another episode of Mission Imperfect. And as promised, following on from our opening episode for series 2 last week on success, we are talking about money. So, Kirsty, this was your idea to talk about money. Do you take it away and let us know your thinking about this as our topic?
Yes, because money might seem like a somewhat strange topic, really, for a couple of life coaches to be addressing in a podcast that's sort of focused on mindset and well-being. Might seem a little bit materialistic, a bit shallow, perhaps. But here's the thing, money matters. It's an important part of our lives, isn't it? It's an unavoidable necessity, at least in our society. When I say our society, we're both in the UK, in most of Western Europe, North America, that sort of area. Certainly, it is very hard to live without money in some form. And not only that, but it's a key factor in our well-being, both physical and mental, which might sound like a slightly surprising thing to say. But think for a moment about all the stress that is caused by financial worries. I mean, that's a huge factor in relationship breakups, apart from anything else. And the amount of angst that goes into fretting about being able to pay the bills and the mortgage and find the money for things like school trips or whatever. Huge stress associated with money. And then there's perhaps a more generic sense of unhappiness that arises when a lack of money means that your opportunities and your choices are really limited, and life can feel very narrow, very restricted. That is not conducive to sort of good sort of mental and emotional well-being long term. I think you'd agree. And I think it's unavoidable that those links between poverty and poor physical health around diet, around life expectancy, even in sort of first world countries.
Yeah.
So money
Yeah, there are
matters.
links. There are links even where you may not see them. And I think we talk, well, I would say we talk about money. Actually, that's another interesting topic. Perhaps we don't talk enough about money, but when we're thinking about it and our own private thoughts about money are often to do with, oh, I can't perhaps afford to do this and how we're going to pay for this. And we can't ignore the current economic climate as well. We have had a cost of living crisis and we're still feeling some of the impact of that. So people have money on their radar, I think,
Yeah.
probably more so than is openly discussed. So yes, the fact that it is a key factor in our well-being, and like you said, physical and mental, and like you said, that opportunity to do things, there is money, there is a cost associated with so many of those things that we want to do. So we have to choose sometimes the priorities, don't we? And have to perhaps say no to things that we would really love to include or have, but money is an issue.
And all of this can lead not just to stress, but to anxiety and to depression. And, it's money is a huge factor in our well-being in the modern
Mm.
world, certainly in first world countries. Which kind of makes us lucky, but also that can be problematic. And we do all know rationally that money can be a really powerful tool for good. I mean, just said, we're lucky to live in first world countries with all the advantages that brings. Um, money, it puts a roof over our head, food in our bellies, clothes on our backs. We don't really have all that if we can't pay for it. It reduces a lot of stressful practical worries and concerns. It creates that choice and opportunity we just spoke about. It gives us both freedom and security, the freedom to do more of what we want, the security to not have to worry and stress so much. And really importantly, it allows us to look after not just ourselves, but the people that we love and care about, and to support good causes and people in need. Money does all of that for us, and that's really positive, and we do all know that. And we also, as a society, we're pretty obsessed with the rich. Let's face it. You can't move on social media for all these powerful influences raking in loads of money, just being famous somehow. And we want to know how they're living and what they're wearing and what they're doing and where they're going. And we're all either judging them or emulating them in terms of what they do and have and how they are. It's pretty crazy, and a bit more old style, but magazines are full of them, aren't they? And there seems to be loads of reality TV featuring people who have got wealth and a certain kind of lifestyle. Not to
Yeah.
mention the old rags to riches stories and the overnight successes and that we love hearing about so much.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting when you said we seem obsessed with the rich. I was thinking the term we often hear is rich and famous, isn't it? That's what we
Yeah.
hear, the rich and famous. It's like the two seem to go hand in hand, and we get sort of intrigued in, like you said, where do they live? What's their house look like? How grand is it? How much did it cost? How much did that dress cost that they're wearing, and so on. And and why do we do that? Is it so we can say how outrageous that they wasted that money on it, or is it because we think, oh, I wish I had those things, just going back to some of those other things we were talking about success last week. And yet, ironically, we also get a little bit interested in the opposite, don't we, to the rags to riches, the downfall, the riches to
Mm.
rags story. And it's a very interesting way to relate to another person, isn't it? About how they have experienced a real upturn or then potentially a real downturn. And I just think it's quite sad, isn't it, to kind of have
Yeah.
that level of interest in somebody's downfall. And yet, well, the press would share that kind of story readily, wouldn't they?
Oh, absolutely. Because people will read it and lap it up. And
Mm,
that there's something in there that speaks to us, isn't it? Maybe it makes us feel better that people who did so much better than us have ended up back where we are. It doesn't sound very nice,
mm.
but maybe it does make us
No,
feel better.
yeah, that
Hmm.
could be it.
And moving on swiftly from that, and that little uncomfortable nugget there. But in spite of, you know, being so fascinated by the rich and knowing all the good shit that money can do, it can still be something of a dirty word, can't it? A bit of a taboo subject to talk about. We'll talk about the cost of living, and the cost of living crisis. We'll talk about inflation. We'll talk about how prices have gone up. We don't often talk about money and our relationship with it, do we?
Yeah,
And I think that there can be an awful lot of negative conditioning around money. Um, I mean, shout if you heard any of these growing up. Money is the root of all evil. Money can't buy happiness. It's better to give than to receive. Money doesn't grow on trees. It's, I mean, who hasn't heard
yeah,
some of those, and how that shapes what we think about money? And money isn't this positive force for making life better. It's a problem. It's bad. And and again, rich people are bad. We've got this weird thing where we're fascinated by them, but we also think that rich people are somehow evil or bad. And there's things like, ban billionaires and eat the rich, which I'm hoping that's not a literal instruction. Um, Being mostly vegetarian, it probably doesn't apply to me anyway, so I'm right. But yeah,
yeah. I hadn't come across that one before. I was like,
no,
what? Sis eat the rich?
apparently, because then I doubted myself when you said you hadn't heard of it. So I did do a quick Google, and yeah, apparently, Rousseau said it in a context around the French Revolution, I think, around when the poor have nothing left to eat, they will eat the rich.
Ah, okay,
And
okay.
it's
That
become
makes
something
sense.
of an anti-capitalist sort of slogan.
Mm,
And there's this idea that runs through an awful lot of our sort of cultural heritage, that poor people inherently better, nobler, more spiritual than rich people. And, you get this, if you grew up in the Christian tradition, the Sunday school stories and things, and, that famous saying, it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And we've got Jesus throwing the money changers and the merchants out of the temple, and living humbly and in poverty, as Buddha did as well. He gave up all his worldly wealth, didn't he, and went and sat under a tree. And huge oversimplification, sorry, but basically, so that this is idea that poverty is somehow better in a spiritual sense than being rich.
Yeah. There's so many negative messages actually, if you think about it, about money.
Yeah,
If you think it's just an inanimate commodity, but this idea of having it, not having it, feelings about people who have it, those
yeah,
who don't have it, there's just reflecting on all of what we've just said and those sayings at the start. It doesn't grow on trees, and you can't waste it, but it doesn't buy happiness either. And it's just there's quite a lot of mixed messages going on about it. So it's no wonder that actually people have probably over their lifetimes quite a complicated relationship with money.
yeah. And this, I certainly grew up with a sort of the idea that you weren't supposed to talk about money. The people who did talk about the money they had or wanted were boasting they were show-offs, or they were some kind of con artist or something. They, just out to get rich off other people somehow.
Yeah. Do they deserve it, for example?
Yeah. And that people who will go after money with any kind of serious intent are, you're just going to sort of going to be willing to trample over everybody to get it. The idea that the
Mm.
rich have done everybody else out of something, which in some cases they may well have done, but not necessarily.
Yeah. Yeah, it becomes a very polarized sort of view, doesn't it, over having and not having, and who's worthy and deserving of it and who isn't. And it can create such divisive views. And you made this really interesting point, Kirsty, about this idea of perhaps particularly with women about we're not really perhaps supposed to be interested in money. We're supposed to be these selfless, unpaid caregivers and not have that same interest in having money. And I thought that's a really interesting point.
Yeah, we're expected. I suppose in some ways as a compliment, we're kind of expected to be more spiritual and more giving than men very often. We're not expected to want to go after money for it to matter to us that much.
Mm.
Whereas men are supposed to be the breadwinners, are supposed to be driven to, going back to last week, driven to succeed and everything. And yet those stereotypes, they don't help a good chunk of the male population or the female population, because women want money. Some women want money more than others. And
Yeah.
yes, men want money, and some men want money less than others.
Yeah.
And there's this idea that it's somehow unfeminine, and a bit too ballsy to want, to get to the top of the career ladder and earn lots of money. Whereas a man who's willing to stay at home and look after the kids while his wife goes out to work is somehow being emasculated. It's all bollocks, isn't it?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you said that word after what I just said.
Yeah, it is a bit. But you're right. You're so right. There's so much that comes up talking about this subject because even though it's a bit of this dirty word taboo subject, there is so much thoughts around it in sort of both positive and negative associations. And this brings us on actually quite rightly to the fact that we start to form opinions, I guess, about money quite early on in our lives, don't we? Because we will observe one way or another people talking about it. And it's interesting, it's something I've become quite aware of. So I want my daughter to be aware that, you know, things do cost money and she has money that she can spend herself. But if she's spent it, doesn't mean you just get it back. You've got to decide what you're going to spend it on, and is it worth it, and so on. But I'm also aware that she probably does hear me talking in the supermarket. How much? When I see how something has gone up, including my favorite biscuits. Very annoying.
This
But
is
yeah,
outrageous.
I know I had to bring in biscuits somewhere, but yeah, they've gone up by like 30% or something. It was quite a significant jump in one go. And you just can't help but kind of exclaim, it's obviously it's not the end of the world. I could choose to buy them, or I could choose to not have them, to be honest. But I'm
No,
aware.
sorry, I don't understand that. You can choose not to have biscuits. This is a thing, is it? Okay, moving on.
No, I still buy them, but slightly reluctantly, because I'm like, I don't get quite the same value for money as I used to. But I am aware that obviously I probably would have said that, and if she will perhaps have observed, and this will also be shaping her view about money, and it's something that we do pick up on, don't we? And it's
Very
how
much
money
so.
is talked about, if it was talked about, the
Biggest.
atmosphere around it, or as you quite rightly said, Kirsty, sometimes the lack of money, or who looked after it as well. It was a sort of a gender divide there potentially as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, your parents' reaction and did money cause rows in your house?
Mm.
Did you get given that sort of opportunity to learn how to manage money that you're giving your daughter? Lots of people don't. Did you hear money as always a cause of struggle, or it all these things will shape how you're going to feel about it. Either you'll start to emulate it, or you're going to react quite strongly against it. But why? So we just talked about all this, the fact that we know on one level that money is a good thing. Money is a useful and powerful tool in life and allows us to do a lot of good. And there's an awful lot of conditioning around money being bad, rich people being evil, and we should not be driven by money. We should not openly want money, and it. But why is that a problem? And I think it's a problem because it ends up causing an awful lot of emotional and mental turmoil, whether very consciously or whether subconsciously. There's this thing called cognitive dissonance when we know we need money and we know how much good stuff it can do for us and that we can do with it. And we believe money is evil and that wanting it is bad. And we've got these things tussling in our heads and pulling us in different directions. Even if we don't truly realize it, that's going to be shaping our relationship with money. And as you've said, that relationship is often not simple or easy.
Yeah, definitely. It's no wonder actually, isn't it? You can put that slant on it and explains, this kind of sort of need and want and desire for it. And yet on the flip side, the negative feelings about it and as we pointed out earlier, it is actually just an inanimate commodity. We've put all these thoughts around it that we don't necessarily have around other things. Um,
It's
it's
just a
interesting,
measure
isn't
of
it?
value, isn't it? When it comes
Mm.
down to it, it's just a way that we measure something's value. But we beat ourselves up for wanting money, for having money, for not having money, for spending money, for not spending it, and perhaps quite often for not managing money, or perhaps for managing it too closely. Um, and on the one hand, we envy, we resent, we judge those who've got more money than us. And on the other, we feel guilty and defensive and judgmental about those who have less money than we do. And all that mental noise can be really pretty wearing, and it's certainly not good for sort of calm, peaceful mental and emotional well-being, is it? And it can create a lot of subconscious blocks to making to making money, to being able to keep hold of money, to being open to receiving money. And and I guess, how well are we likely to manage money when we believe it's basically bad and that, having or wanting more of it makes you a terrible person and greedy and selfish? how well are you likely to be able to manage your money when you're
Mm.
thinking like that? And it's, yeah.
Let's try and shed a little ray of hope, Kirsty, because I think we've spoken quite a lot about the
Mm,
sort of the rhetoric around money, and I totally see it. And it's so interesting because I like to think that I'm not going to say ambivalent because that's not quite the right word, but I'd like to think that I don't see it as evil. I see it as a commodity, but yet as much as anyone else, I'm very mindful. What am I spending? What am I spending it on? Is it good value? I don't want to waste it, so that I still have these thoughts around it. I'd like to think they're not too polarized, and I can easily see how they can become that,
mm,
either through situations, upbringing, and whatever. But there are things that we can do to try and help our thinking around money to be a little bit more
yeah.
positive. So let's start talking a little bit about that to shed that little ray of light.
Yeah, because the first thing is that awareness is key to change. So just recognizing that you've got some of these ambivalent thoughts and feelings around money makes a big difference. You have to make the invisible visible in order to be able to take a good look at it and find ways of changing what you want to change about it. And it's, that there are no magic wands. We've said this before. There are no magic wands. Nothing sort of changes permanently for overnight, I don't believe. But there's lots we can do to start bringing this into the open and switching it about and creating a healthier relationship with money that works for us. So, I mean, I'm something that I always advocate first is around reading or listening to stuff about money and noticing what comes up for you. A couple of things that I've read, I've enjoyed, and they're all quite different sort of takes on it. There's Jen Sincero's "You Are a Badass at Making Money," Morgan Housel's "The Psychology of Money." That's probably the nicest read, the easiest read, that one. And T. Harv Eker's "Secrets of the Millionaire Mind." They're all quite different, but it was really interesting because I had never thought I would read a book about money. And yet it brought up so much and allowed me to notice so much in my thinking. And
Yeah,
once it's in the open, you start to pay attention to it.
definitely. I totally agree. I'm exactly the same. I didn't think it was a topic that I perhaps wanted or needed to delve into. Like I said, I almost felt a bit ambivalent about it. I acknowledge what it's there for, try to be fairly careful. But I read, I think it was Denise Duffield
Oh,
Thomas's book. Oh, actually, she's got more than one. I think it's probably the first one, Get Rich Lucky Bitch, I think it's called. So it was a fascinating read. There was
mm,
stuff in there that just hadn't even occurred to me, and some exercises that she encourages you to do. And I do these things sometimes out of just pure interest. What's going to come up for me? Because they're not
yeah,
necessarily questions that I would ask myself. So if someone asks me them, and encourages me to think about it, something's going to pop up that I perhaps wasn't aware of, which brings us very nicely on. So you've got some little journal prompts that we can encourage people to have a think about, and we'll put them in the show notes as well, so people can
yeah,
take those away afterwards.
yeah. I mean, these are very basic ones, and I'm sure that you can find plenty online, lots of good exercises around this. But just things like "money is" as a sentence starter, and maybe use that something like 7 times to really start digging down to what is buried deep around what comes up when you just complete that sentence. Just with as many words as you want, but it only has to be one. The best thing about money is, and the worst thing about money is, not having money means, having money means, and rich is, which might sound a bit strange, but that's kind of the point. What's going to come up for you after
Mm.
you write those words? And you said we'll put those in the show notes, and there'll be plenty more online if you're interested in following up on that. And I would say challenge your views about the rich and about being rich. Um, I mean, it's easy to assume that you're not rich, but did you know that according to the World Bank, there are 3.5 billion people living on less than $6.85 per day? And of those, 700 million are living on less than $2.15 per day. I mean, I find that absolutely mind-blowing. And I don't think I'm rich, but to those people, I've got wealth they can only dream of.
Mm.
So
It's
when
a
I
really
start,
sobering thought, isn't it?
yeah,
It's really sobering and it gives you perspective actually on what you have that also maybe you take for granted, even things that are paid for in this country, like our health service and other things. We have a certain level of living that for other people would be luxury. And, is like you said, that those figures around, just $2.15 a day for 700 million.
yeah,
Wow.
it's sobering, isn't it?
Mm,
And if you then, are they thinking about us in the way that we think about billionaires?
yeah.
And if
Oh, that's
they're
interesting.
exactly uncomfortable but interesting. And at what point would you consider yourself officially too rich and feel morally obliged to refuse more money or to give away everything in excess of that amount? Because these are calls that are often made around those classed as super rich, around billionaires. You shouldn't be allowed to be a billionaire. At what point do you stop that? Is it a pound or a dollar, whatever, cent, a penny before billion? And how are you adding that up? And where is it? Or are you allowed to go a cent over? And what would you do? How much do we actually need in order to live comfortably compared to these people living on $2.15 or even $6.85 a day? How much do we really need? And at what point should everybody have their wealth cut off in order to favour a more equitable distribution? Because it's very easy to look at those who have more and say they should give some up so it's fairer. What about us? Um, I
That's a big question, Kirsty. That might be a whole other podcast.
Indeed, but I mean, for me, that has just sort of changed my attitude to thinking about the super rich.
Mm.
If I won't apply it to myself, what right do I have to apply it to other people? And then, on a nicer note, a little more comfortable note, think about the positive difference you could make to your life and that of others with £1 million. If you're thinking that being rich is a bad thing, what good would you do with that money? Would you like to do with that money?
I'll happily let you know, Kirsty, if you just send that million my way, no problem. No, it's fun. That's a really good point, and it's funny. I've always thought I would make an excellent lottery winner. I would have, it's really sad just talking about money like this. If you see very sad stories about people who won the lottery, which you think would be the most brilliant, life-changing thing, and yet it's caused them a huge amount of misery and despair. And in many cases, they've lost, or I say lost, I don't know, made unwise investments or just blown that money. And it's interesting because it probably comes back to their thinking about that money and their relationship with it in the first place. And I thought, so I've just, for fun, thought, well, how would I respond if I won, you know, a million? And I recognize I'd actually have to enter something to win it, which is probably
Always
part of the
helps.
problem.
Yeah.
But I just think it would be brilliant. I think I automatically think to myself of some nice things I'd like to do, some people I'd like to support, some causes I'd like to support. Happy days. And yeah, and it'd be interesting though, wouldn't it? Would I actually respond as I think I would? Because I'm sure those people didn't see it coming how it ended up for them.
It's only one way to find out, Kathryn, start doing the lottery.
I know, but I get a bit they added loads of extra numbers on, didn't they? And it's just, yeah.
Yeah, there's all sorts of figures around the amount of money that um poor, in inverted commas, poor people spend on things like the lottery because and when you add that up, it seems crazy in terms of the amount of disposable income they don't have. And yet it seems like the only viable way to break out of where they're at. But
Mm.
that's a whole other money mindset issue, isn't it? But I agree with you. If you have an unhealthy relationship with money, and all this sort of cognitive dissonance going on in your head around money, and you suddenly get a huge wad of it, it seems unsurprising that it doesn't end well.
Mm.
But finally, in what we can do, and this may sound a little bit naff potentially, but bear with me, is create affirmations for the belief changes you would like to have about money. So going back to the things you hear about money growing up, these things stick, and we will all dredge them up. You know, I can remember saying to my own son, money doesn't grow on trees, because it was said to me. You know, the things that we keep hearing, that we keep repeating, stick with us. So if you want to believe something different about money, if you want to shift that belief, or at least quieten down the ones that don't feel right, that you've been conditioned into rather than choosing for yourself, try finding the words to express that. Like, you know, money is freedom. I'm open to receiving. If you want, you could add something like, I'm open to receiving in order to give. You know, what makes sense for you? You know, I am allowed to want more, because you are. It doesn't make you a bad person.
Mm.
Unless you intend to do it, to use it to do something really horrible, in which case don't want more. You are a bad person. But we're assuming you're not. Um, so find words that express what what you know is good about money, and the good that you will do with it, and the good things you feel about money, and start saying them to yourselves. Write them down where you can see them, because that kind of repetition will help to start shift you away from the negatives and that difficult relationship with money.
Yeah.
And we found a couple of quotes around money. I mean, there are lots out there, but I think the one that really spoke to me was, money is only a tool. It will take you wherever you wish, but it will not replace you as the driver. And that was from Ayn Rand. Going back to exactly what you were saying, it is just the tool, isn't it?
Yeah.
If it's even that, it's just a measure of something else's value. But
Yeah. But you are the driver, and that's the
yeah,
really important part, isn't it? I like this one from Barack Obama, which is, money is not the only answer, but it makes a difference.
brilliant, isn't it?
It's very
Yeah.
wise, isn't it?
Wise man, yeah. And interesting, you found a Woody Allen quote last week for success, and one popped up for money even before I knew that you'd found a Woody Allen one. I went, money is better than poverty, if only for financial reasons, which I think it just made me giggle. It's
Yes.
undeniable.
Say it like it is.
Yeah. So of course there has to be a question, and it's quite a straightforward question, actually. I think. But an interesting one. So, what words immediately come to mind when you think about money?
Okay. So this is interesting because we both had a very different take on this. Like, you literally came up with some words associated, didn't you? But I came up with spend it was my first
Yay!
response. It's that commodity. It is a means to something. I don't
Yeah,
Money for money's sake to me is not important. It's what does it bring? What could that money obtain? And yet I do want to say I'm not sort of totally reckless. I do have some, uh save some. That's another one of my thoughts. Be sensible, think about the future. And that this final one is probably actually the biggest one, which is about, earning it. I want to be someone who is sort of quite self-sufficient, and feeling that, I mean, this is probably a whole slight other topic about, the value of earning that money yourself and spending it, and not having any of that perhaps guilt that comes with sometimes spending money. But I do like the idea of being able to enjoy that money. And that'll be interesting to see if I did ever win that lottery win, the fact that I haven't earned it, how would I feel about that? I say here quite confidently, oh, I think I'd be fine with it. I think I'd be really happy with it. But would I? Be interesting, wouldn't it? Would I just spend it? Would I
yeah.
splurge it just so I can say I don't have it anymore, but I have these things instead? So it's kind of okay. Interesting to see what kind of, but I don't think we're going to get to test this one out, but I wonder if other people feel slightly similarly. That'd be interesting to see. But
Maybe a passing billionaire with an interest in sort of coaching and social experiments will gift you £1 million so we can see what happens. if any of those are listening,
Yeah,
I'm willing to
awesome.
be in on this as well. Um,
So, are you putting that million my way, Kirsty, or are you saying me too?
so yeah, it would be a good experiment to be part of, wouldn't it?
Be very
Yeah.
willing.
And so for me, the words that came up, I was quite pleased with the first two because they felt it. I felt it reflected, the work I've done on my money mindset, and they were choice and freedom. That feels nice. The next one out was luck, which I felt was probably a bit more ambivalent. That so often it seems to be a matter of luck, being the right person in the right place at the right time. Um, but that doesn't mean that you can enjoy your luck. You haven't taken it from anybody else. And the last word chose that, always a work in progress because it was unfair. It still feels to me unfair that some people have so much and others have so little, but that's a big problem to solve. And I don't think that one individual choosing to have less actually solves it.
Yeah. And I think that's why it's such a big, meaty, interesting topic to think about. And like we said very early on, our relationship with money is naturally, I think, going to be quite complicated for all of these reasons. But hopefully, we've given some thoughts and insights into how to have a more positive relationship with money, and whether that's the kind of reducing the kind of stress around money or boosting the positive thoughts around
Yeah.
wanting it and having it. So I really hope that people can have a go at answering that question and see what that brings up for them.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening. And we hope you'll join us next week for another episode of Mission Imperfect. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Mission Imperfect.
Please visit the show notes for details on how to contact us and for any resources we may have on the topic discussed.
Until next time, keep being imperfectly you. No one does it better.